back to Let's Make a Visual Novel with Unity 3D. Today, as the title says, we'll be working with the background, foreground, and cinematic layers inside of our UI canvas. First off, I would like to apologize if the quality of the audio is a little wacky. I'm using a temporary microphone until I get the replacement in, which should be within the next few weeks or so. So hopefully that'll come in, we'll be good to go. Now let's talk about the background. When we left off, we had gotten to where our characters can transition between emotions, and the characters use the image components because they use sprites to operate. But our background, foreground, and cinematic layer, they're not going to use images because images can't use textures. They can only use sprites. So we'll be using the raw image components instead. Now what we have right now is a background currently rendering completely black. So that is actually going to be, what we're going to do is going to be inspired by the way our characters are created. So let me come into resources, and here Raylene, we have her. If I just open up that view there, we see that the object is actually just a container, and then we have the separate renderers inside. Now for the background, it's only going to have one renderer, but we're still going to want the container because if we use transitions, then we're going to want any active images, whether they're transitioning in or out, to be a child of the background. So this object here, I'm just going to rename it to the background layer, and remove the image script because it's just a container. And then I'll duplicate it, and just say layer image as the name, and give it the raw image component. Yeah, I might want to hit enter so that actually saves. What did I call it again? Layer image. Alright, enter. There we go. Name is saved. And then I'll parent it to the background layer. Leave the color as white, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to disable it. I'm just going to disable that object because I'm not going to make a prefab of it. Instead, what we're going to do whenever we want to create a new image for the background or whatever layer we're working on, we're going to create a new object referenced by this. This is just a storage object, if you will. So now let's go ahead and make the other two layers, which would be for our foreground, and that will be obviously in front of everything. So foreground layer, and then the cinematic layer, which if you remember from the very first episode when we were working with the UI, the cinematic layer, all that is just a graphical layer positioned in front of the characters but behind the dialogue. Alright, perfect. Now let's go into our core scripts, and we're just going to create a class to handle all the properties of these layers. I'll just call it something like BCFC for background, cinematic, and foreground controller. Name it whatever you want because we're going to be accessing it through a static instance. So once the script is up, since we're going to be using UI elements, the first thing we want to do is incorporate the UI namespace. And it doesn't look like MonoDevelop loaded correctly, so I'm going to restart it and be back in just a second. Okay, there we go, finally up and going. Now the next thing we want to do, as I've said, we're going to make this a static instance so that we can reference it just by the class name. So public static BCFC, or whatever you called it, instance, and assign that through awake. Can get rid of start and update, not going to need those. What we are going to need, however, is a serializable class to represent any layer that we might have in our UI. So system.serializable, it'll allow us to view it in the editor. Public class, and I'll just call this a layer. So what is each layer going to have? First off, we're going to have a game object, which will be the root, just like we had for our character. We need something for each image to be parented to once it's spawned into the scene. Then, since we're using raw images, we'll have the active image. And for transitions, we'll need a list of all the raw images currently being used, so that way we can transition in and out appropriately. Our first function is going to be called setTexture, and we'll take in a texture file called texture. So we have two choices. We can either pass in a texture or we can pass in nothing to essentially disable this layer from being visible in the scene. So if texture is not equal to null, then we're trying to change the active image to something. Otherwise, what we're going to do is get rid of whatever the active image might be if there is one. So if active image is not equal to null and we're trying to set it to null, then all images.remove active image equals null, but not before we destroy it. So GameObject.destroy immediate active image.GameObject. Otherwise, if the texture is not null and we're trying to set it, then we need to create an active image. So we'll need a reference for something to create. Public GameObject. Instead of the prefab, we have the object already connected to whatever layer this is. So we'll have the new image object reference. And down here, void create new active image. Then we'll just say GameObject ob equals instantiate the reference from the root.transform as a GameObject. Then we need to get the raw image attached to it. So raw equals ob.getComponent raw image. But remember, that object is disabled at the very start. So before we try to get any component, we need to make sure the object is active. So object.setActive true. Otherwise, our raw image would be returned null, and we wouldn't be able to assign anything with that value. Now, active image equals raw, and all images.add raw, because we're going to want to incorporate that into any transitions that might occur. Now back here, if texture is not null, and if our active image is null, then we want to create new active image. By this point, we know we have an active image, so we need to apply the texture. Since this is setting and not transitioning, it could be instant. Active image.texture equals texture, and we want to make sure it's fully visible, so active image.color equals global functions.set alpha of active image.color with a value of 100% opaqueness. Now remember about the movie textures. A movie texture is a type of texture, so we could pass in that or a regular texture 2D object, and both of them would work fine with this. But in order to get the movie texture to actually start playing, to have an animated background, we need to call the function play from the movie texture, but only if that's what it truly is. So in order to find that out if this is actually just a regular texture or a video, we'll just try to cast whatever the texture is as a movie texture. So movie equals texture as movie texture. If movie is not equal to null, then movie.play. So we're going to play the movie. And any background I have is probably going to loop, but just in case, you never know what you're going to do. So boolean if movie then loop by default will be true, and I'll just set loop to equal that value. If movie then loop. Great, so that'll play the movie. And in normal circumstances, you wouldn't be having audio play with a background. That would be controlled separately through either a music handler or a sound effect machine, not necessarily anything to do with a background, because that, frankly, to me, doesn't make much sense. That would be something controlled separately, but if for some reason you did want to do that, the movie texture is imported with an audio clip attached to it. So movie.audioClip will actually get you that clip, and then you can then pass that into an audio source and play the music or the whatever it is, the audio. So if it is a movie texture, then we're going to loop it and play it. Now, what if we already have an active image and it's a movie? then what we're actually going to want to do is stop the movie that's playing currently, because if we don't do that, then even once you remove the instance of that or the assignment of that movie texture, even if you remove it, it's still going to keep playing in the background. So the next time you try to apply it to anything, it's going to start off where it should be at that point in time, not back from the very beginning. And what will actually happen, it's kind of weird, I tried this before, it'll appear as a still image, like where it should be at this point in time, but if you had audio playing with it, the audio will start where you stopped it, continue on, and once they resync, then the video will continue. So it's kind of weird, but the best way to make sure that we have it report back to the beginning on any next assignment is to just make sure the movie is stopped. So if the active image is not equal to null and active image.texture is not equal to null, then we're going to do the same thing, try to get it as a movie, but in this case, if it is a movie, we're simply going to stop it. Oh, I did not copy there. Control-C, copy, V, paste. So, cancel out loop, don't really care about that there. All I care about is making the movie stop. Doesn't even matter if it's playing or if it's finished or whatever. Stop will just make sure that it is stopped. So there we go, that's our set texture function. Before we continue any further, I'm going to make a testing script so we can see this in action. So back in Unity, in my testing folder, going to create a new C# script called layered testing, and then we'll open that up. And in here, we'll just do pretty much what we've done with everything else. I'm going to get the controller, get that on start, bcfc.instance, and then an update, if I press certain keys, will just change different layers. Before I do that, now would probably be a good time to actually assign the layers now. So we have the 3 layers. Let's just go ahead and make public layer, call it background equals new layer, and the same for the cinematic and the foreground. Now back in the controller or the testing, I can assign it. Layer will equal controller background if I press Q. It'll be cinematic if I press W, and it'll be foreground if I press E. Alright, and once we get here, if I'm holding down the T key, then we're going to transition, which we haven't set up yet. If not, then once I press the A key, I'm actually going to set the layer that I want to edit, make it set the texture. I better give myself a texture up here. Public texture, text, and then also a movie texture, because we want to try that out. So set the texture to text, else if input.getKeyDown, keycode.s, then layer.setTexture, movie. So in here, I've got a few different videos that we may be importing as different backgrounds. One like this animated train background. This one's good right here. That one's also got audio to it, but I wouldn't be using it. And probably this one. These videos will be posted in the link in the description, so don't worry, you guys will have access to this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and import those right now. In my resources, images, and under UI, I'm going to make a new folder for backdrops. For the still images, let's see what I got. Alright, I've got 4 images here. It looks like 2 forests, a bridge, and an old town. So I'll just take those and drag them into the Unity editor here. And then those will import. So here we are, they are imported as default texture 2Ds, and that's exactly how we want them for the raw image. Now for the movies, however, I'm going to drag that tree and the whatever that is, the beautiful city. Gonna drag that into the folder as well, and those are going to import fairly quickly. There we are. Now we have these. However, they're the wrong type of file. They're imported as a video clip, which actually isn't going to work on a raw image. So if we want this to be compatible with a raw image display, then we just click the importer version from video clip to movie texture. And this is with Unity 2018.1. Quality, I'm crazy, I'm going to set it to 1 full quality and hit apply. And then that's going to re-import it. And from my experience, doing this usually takes about double the length of the video. So let's wait for that to go. This is about a 16-second video, so we'll be there shortly. And I was mistaken, that video was actually 1 minute and 6 seconds, so it took a little longer. This video right here, the one with the beautiful city, was actually 16 seconds. But now we're ready to go. We have our animated images and we have our still images. So the only thing we have to do now is assign our layer controller, which is called the BCFC for me. So BCFC, I'm just going to add that directly to my canvas object, the root of all the UI. So now I have the 3 layers here, the background, cinematic, and foreground. And all of them have 4 variables. I don't need to worry about the last 2. In fact, I can probably hide those from the inspector view. But for right now, what is the root of the background layer? That's obviously the container, which is the background layer. And the reference for any new image we're going to create is the layer image attached to it. Same thing goes for cinematic, as well as foreground. Alright, just by setting those up, we are ready to go. So the layer controller is ready. All we have to do is apply the testing script that I've just made. I'm going to disable character testing, because I don't need to do that now. Now, layer testing. So what texture do I want to apply? I kind of like the look of this town, so I'm going to set that one first. Animated, let's go with the city as our movie texture. And now let's begin the game. I don't like that green. Let me just go ahead and change that background from green to black. So right now there is no image, and that little white line is because I'm rendering gizmos. Alright, there we go. So the tester, let's go ahead and play this. Great, so right now we just have a black void behind our canvas, but I'm going to hit Q so that way I'm editing the the background rather, and A to set the image to the town texture. There we go. Now let's do S, and that should bring up the movie as well as start playing it automatically. There we go. There it is, working. We have those God rays moving across. Don't know if you can see that, but the water is moving down in the background. It's also up front, but the speech panel is hiding that. So let me go ahead and do the foreground and set that. Ooh, null reference exception. What have we got there? ES. Yeah. Okay. Obviously I hit something wrong. So, alright. So there's the image. The movie's playing on our UI. That's good. I still want to see what that null reference was, though, because that showed up for a reason. Alright. Layer testing update. Line 35. What was that? What did I mess up? Line 35, layer.set texture move. Okay, yeah, so I just didn't press one of these keys, so I was trying to edit a empty layer. Alright, so that's fine. Now all we have to do is create the transitions, and if you remember from our character manager, which was quite lengthy in the last video, actually not the character manager, the character class itself, the way we did the transitions was by using the global functions. So let's come into our layer class, and below set texture I'm going to create a new void called public void transition to texture. And same thing, we're going to pass in the texture called texture, and we need the speed of the transition. Good default speed is about 2. And also if we're going to smooth or not. These are the same values that we used for the character transitions. It's pretty much the exact same thing, only we're using raw images instead. Smooth equals false. In my opinion, that's a better transition for backgrounds, and actually for characters too. Lerping just takes way too long. And the final one, Boolean, since we can possibly do movies, if movie then loop equals true right off the bat. Okay, So by now you guys know my practice with coroutines. We'll have our void stop transitioning, so that way we don't attempt to run two coroutines of the same type at once, cause some serious clashes. Make the I enumerator for transitioning, which will take in every value we passed into transition texture. Pass all that in, only they aren't going to have any default values. There we go. Need the coroutine variable to identify whether we're transitioning or not. Transitioning. Alright. Transitioning, there we go. Equals null. And the public boolean that can be accessed by anything. Public bool is transitioning. Can only be retrieved. Return if our coroutine is not equal to null. Alright, stop transitioning. If we are transitioning, if is transitioning, then, okay, what's going to control this? Because a layer is not a mono behavior, and only mono behaviors can run coroutines. So with our characters, we made the character manager handle all the transitions. With the layers, we're going to make the layer controller handle them. So bcfc.instance.stopCoroutine transitioning. Transitioning equals null. There we go. Alright, transition to texture, don't even give it a choice, just say stop transitioning. However, as with the character, if we're already at the texture that we want to use, so if active image is not equal to null and active image.texture equals texture, not sure why that's capitalized, it shouldn't be, that should be lowercase t. Same for down here. So if we have an active image and that active image's texture is equal to what we're trying to transition to, then we don't need to start a new transition. Return. Break it. And then we just need to start it. So transitioning equals bcfc.instance.startCoroutine capital T transitioning. Because that's our coroutine, and we pass in every variable that was fed into this function. Smooth, if movie, then loop. There we go. That's our transition to texture function. And now here's transitioning. And to make my life a little easier, I'm going to come straight to the character class where we set our transitioning function for them, because there's a little loop here that I'm just going to copy. Call me lazy, but I don't feel like typing that again. It's getting a little late here, so for int I equals I, while I is less than renderers.allBodyRenderers, but in this case our layer has all images dot count, so we'll just replace those instances with all images. And then renderers.bodyRenderer, well, that will be the active image for this layer. If, and we're getting a raw image, not a texture, image.texture equals texture, then set that as the active texture or active image, because if we already have one that's transitioning out, then we want to make that the new active image, obviously. I have just repeated myself I don't know how many times. Let's move on, shall we? Okay, now here we go. First off, if our active image equals null. If we didn't find anything and we have no active image currently, we're going to need to create one. So if it's null, or if our current active image dot texture is not equal to what we're trying to apply, then we have absolutely no image currently using that texture, and we need to create a new one anyway. So then we create a new active image, and let's head back up to where we did this up here, because all we need is to just copy that from our set texture and apply it down here, because we're doing the same thing, only we're going to make sure the alpha of that image is at 0 from the very start. We apply the texture, we make sure if it's a movie, if movie then loop. Oh, if movie the loop, okay, weird. If movie then loop. Let me just correct my typo up here. Alright, and all of this should happen only if we're not trying to transition to a null texture. If we are trying to transition to a null texture, then we're trying to remove the visibility of this layer. So if texture is not equal to null, then we're going to attempt to create or retrieve the image that's rendering this target texture. Otherwise, what are we going to do? We're going to remove the active image. And that will simply be by saying active image equals null, and we'll let transition take care of the rest. Alright, so that's all we need to do here, and we need global functions to take care of the transition. So let's just save that right there and then go into our global functions script. In here we have transition images, which was used for our characters. Let's just copy that whole thing, because it's basically exactly what we need, just different variable types. And rename it to transition raw images, where we reference an image, just change every image to raw image. And down here where we destroy the image, remember, if it's a movie, we need to make sure that we stop the movie from playing anymore. So, back in our layer controller, in set image, if we currently had a texture, I'm going to copy that portion where we try to get it as a movie and stop it if there is one. And then just down here, we're going to do exactly that. Movie texture equals image.texture as movie. If it's not null, stop it. And then remove it from the images and destroy it, and then continue on to the next item. So now in our coroutine we can actually finish that up now. Say while global functions dot transition raw images, we need to reference the active image, we need to reference all images, we need to pass in speed and smooth. So while it's transitioning, we're just going to yield until the end of the frame. Yield, return new, wait for end of frame, and then stop transitioning after all that is taken care of. Back in layer testing, where I have this transition area here, all I'm going to do is copy what I've got here for setting the image, and instead of setting, we're going to transition to a texture. And then I may make a float up here for the speed of the transition, and a boolean for whether we smooth or not. And then pass those in instead of using the default values. And if all is well, we should not have any errors there. Alright, terrific. Doesn't look like we have any issues. So what we're going to do is go ahead and play this and watch the transition effects. Make sure everything's working right. In here, let's go with the background first. So holding down Q, I'm messing with the background. Now I'm holding T to make sure I transition, and let's set the still image. You know, it might be handy if I actually set the speed to something we can use instead of 0. Just saying, that might help. Alright, Q, transition, still image. There we go, town has now faded in. I can set it to the movie, I can set it back to the town. Now I'm holding T again to transition. We're going to transition to the movie and watch it play during the transition. Working like a champ. Now E, let's do the foregrounds just so we can see that a little better. Just like that. Then transition. Sweetness. Alright, now let's see what it would look like if we transition between movies. If I can remember what keys to press. ETS. Alright, here we go. Here's transitioning from a movie to a movie. That seemed a little laggy. Alright, so E, transition between the movie, and the transition works good. It's a little laggy for me because I'm on a laptop, not a lot of memory processor usage, and I'm also running a recording program, so it shouldn't be that laggy for you. But if it is, consider using a lower quality, lower resolution video, or just importing it at a slightly lower setting. Just toy around with it, see what works better with performance. The only downside is the import time for these videos, because they do take a little while. But as you can see, all of that works. We now have transitions for movies, and let me just go ahead and set the movie to none, so we can actually watch this foreground fade out. TS. And there we go, it's faded out, and now we are looking at our speech panel, and what would be the characters there, although there's no character currently. There we are. So if I want to do the cinematic layer, WA, there's the cinematic layer, blocking out the character. And just set that to none. After I click back in, and we've got our character again, with just the background visible. So I hope this video proved useful for you guys, hope you enjoyed it, got something out of it, and the next video we're going to be looking at working with a music handler, so that way we can start getting some audio, sound effects, and BGM into our visual novel. That'll really start to bring things to life. Currently, we already have a lot of functionality, but we're looking at a lot more ahead, so I am looking forward to seeing you guys then, and looking forward to what we're about to be doing, because we're about to get into some pretty cool stuff. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that alarm button so you'll receive notifications when we push out the next videos. Until the next time, I'll see you guys later, and have a good time.